Okay, everybody, I'm gonna start the tonight's water and utilities meeting. We have two items on the agenda. First, we have a presentation from Todd Danielson, who is the Chief Utilities Executive for Avon Lake Municipal Utilities, correct? And that's where the city of Medina gets our water supply. He's gonna give us a presentation here about the Frazzle ice and how it impacted the intakes up on Lake Erie and how that impacted our water system. And then after that, I already told Todd he could leave after we go through a little question and answer after the presentation. And then we'll get into the city of Medina and talk about options that we might have in the future to get a little better prepared in case something like this or worse might happen, and that we continue to have water for our customers and the residents of Medina. So I will open it up to Todd to, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, tell everybody about you, and then we'll go right into your presentation.
Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. Almost standing room only here. My name is Todd Danielson, as the council member mentioned, and I'm with Avon Lake Regional Water. Avon Lake Municipal Utilities changed its name to Avon Lake Regional Water, so I'll probably use a little bit of both terms. We are located right on Lake Erie, and we've been providing water to outside of Avon Lake since the 50s. So for about 60 years, we've been providing water outside of Avon Lake, and now that we're down into Medina, we actually hit parts of 7 counties. What happened on January 8th, 9th type of time frame was something called Frazzle ice, which is not a common occurrence where we are in Lake Erie, but does happen a little bit more frequently, especially in the Western Basin. For instance, Ottawa County can have this 5 times a year. The last time we had it was 5 years ago, and we're going to be making several different changes to hopefully limit the chances of it ever happening again. Frazzle ice, you think about ice, and maybe you look at your pond out back, and ice usually forms at the top, and it slowly gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Well, the difference of what happened on the 8th and 9th really was that it never formed on the top. We had some pretty warm weather, you might remember back in the early part of January, and then it just dropped. It dropped like a rock, and we dropped 50 degrees, basically. And what happened was we had the open water of Lake Erie over where our intakes are. And when this 50-degree change happened, the water was just slowly turning over. So the water was never forming up top. I think you probably all know that the densest water is 39 degrees. Then after that, water starts getting lighter again, and that's why ice forms on the top. But as this water was turning over, ice started forming basically at the bottom. And it was this, what was called Frazzle ice, which is basically like ice shards. And these ice shards, they weren't floating, they were sinking, and we were starting to draw them into our intakes. And as we drew them into our intakes, you think of intakes are basically like grates on the bottom, a funnel with a grate on top of it. And these grates are encased in copper to prevent zebra mussels from forming on them. So this copper was cold, the Frazzle ice starts to form on them, and then it starts to build up bigger and bigger and bigger, so the screens started blinding over, is essentially what happened. Let me move on, because I'm sure I'm going to get past my slides. So what was happening is these screens were starting to blind over. And all the technical terms, basically what it's saying is that basically it's only hundredths of a degree difference is what could happen. When water is right around that freezing mark, it could be 31.95, and if it's moving, it's doing okay. But then you've got this cold copper of the intake, which just starts to cause this ice to start forming on top of it. So anyway, the whole event, the way it happened, it started actually on the 7th for us. And we just finished our full day of work and got home, and the water plant manager got called back in at about 9 o'clock saying, hey, we're having a little bit of issues. And if you can see the schematic here, what we have is, okay, so this is Lake Erie right here, and this is a couple thousand feet out into Lake Erie is what we call the crib. And that's this funnel type thing that I was talking about below the ground, below the bottom of the lake. And these grates are on top of the crib. And so the water plant manager was called in that we were starting to have this issue where we could not pull enough water into the wet well. So we have pumps here that push the water into the treatment plant, but it's pulling the water out from the lake. So when this level starts going down, it's because we can't pull enough water in. So that was happening around 9 p.m. On Tuesday, the 7th of January. So he was called in. He was trying to work through this. We had this issue happen once about 5 years ago, and we thought, okay, what we do when in a situation such as that, we start to push water back out. So if you start to have the grates starting to blind over with the ice, okay, we'll turn the pumps around, and we'll start pushing water back out to see if you can break the ice free. And that's what we did 5 years ago, and that's what worked. So we tried to start doing that during the nighttime. And then the other thing we started to do is we actually have this line 54 inches in diameter. It's 4.5 feet wide. We have a small pipe inside that we usually put in something called potassium permanganate, which helps to prevent zebra mussels from clogging our intakes. Well, we don't need the permanganate in the wintertime, so we were trying to push air out through that pipe to bubble around here. Think of like a washing machine. How do you get dirt off of clothes? You do a couple of things. You can you spray it. Maybe instead of a washing machine, just you're home, you got a dirty shirt, you try to spray it off with water. That's what we're trying to do with the ice. If that didn't work, you could use some sort of an agitation, and that's what the air was like. And then later, throughout into the next day, we try to do other things. What else do you do to try to get the dirt off of clothes? Well, you might add chemicals, surfactant or soap. Well, instead of adding soap, what we tried to do at one point was we tried to add salt. So we pushed some salt out there, and that didn't work either. But during the night, for instance, we talked with your service department employees around midnight to say, hey, we're having the icing issues. Can you stop pulling so much water out of Spieth? Let's work through this. And throughout the night, we started talking with your service department guys, people from all of our other wholesale jurisdictions. But really, come around the morning time, 8 or 9 a.m. is when we were like, okay, this is going to take a while. This is going to take a little bit longer for us to work through. And that's when we started sending out our notifications to our customers. We were interacting with everybody, with all our bulks. I might have mentioned we've been providing water for about 60 years outside of Avon Lake. About 85% of the water we produce goes outside of city limits. So our bulk customers, our customers within Avon Lake, the commercial customers, the residential customers, Ohio EPA, the media. This was a big deal. I think I'm sure all of you understand down here is a big deal. I mean, because there's a financial impact, there's a potential medical, social impact. There are all these different impacts. So we were trying to coordinate with a lot of different people. We talked about the brine solution. We looked at a variety of options to try to make this thing work. We even talked with the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard had an ice-breaking ship, but unfortunately it's all the way out of Detroit. And it would have taken 20 hours to get the ice-breaking ship out here to try to help us out. And really what that would have been meant to do would have been meant to, we had divers that were with us that could go out and see what was going on with their intake, see if there was something that they could do to break up the ice. But eventually, by middle of the afternoon, so this thing started Tuesday night at 9 p.m. And by the middle of the afternoon Wednesday, the situation was looking like we don't know how we're going to break this ice free. We had never completely lost the ability to pump water. We just had reduced the ability significantly. We determined that let's investigate the idea of, instead of using our typical intake, let's pump around our intake. So we talked with some local vendors who had pumps that we could rent. They got the pumps out there Wednesday evening, and by 11 o'clock Wednesday night, this company, Xylem Dewatering Solutions, had some pumps in place. We had the first pump running around 11, which was pumping about 2 million gallons a day. And in the wintertime, 16 or 17 million gallons per day is what we are typically pumping in the wintertime. So by 11 p.m. we started pumping 2, and we were pumping, I don't know, 3 or 4 million gallons per day through our intakes. Then early in the morning, Thursday the 9th, we got the second and third pumps running, which got up to about 6 or 7 million gallons per day through these bypass pumps. And then within the next couple of hours, just by the changing of having more flow pumping around and less flow pumping through those intakes, the ice finally dislodged. And historically, when other jurisdictions have had this event, it's a transitional thing from the warm weather to the cold weather. And usually it doesn't take longer than about a day to break through this whole situation. And for us, it was about 36 hours. So by 5 in the morning on the 9th, we were back up pumping well beyond what our typical daily demands are to start filling back up our treatment plant and then start filling back up the pumps, the tanks in the system. So on Thursday, we notified our residents, 6 a.m., that they could start returning to normal water. We were working with the staff here at the city, and it was middle of the afternoon when you all were able to start using water from the Big Speed Throat tanks. A couple of pictures to help people kind of visualize what was going on. What we had to do, you can see the pumps in the bottom left picture. These are big pumps you haul behind a one-ton truck, or they might be skid mounted, it depends on which pump you're looking at. But we had to cut a road in, we had to build a road down to the edge of Lake Erie. And we had staff, the top right picture is showing our own staff from Xylem Dewatering Solutions, and the divers who are all working together to get these pumps set up. Bottom right picture is actually showing a diver. We had to go out 300 feet onto Lake Erie because these suction lines were running across the lake, and we were cut holes into the lake to draw this water out of the lake. So I certainly am glad I wasn't the one going into that water. That time of night and in the temperature. It was about -15, I think, at that time. Top picture is just a picture from the lake looking back at the treatment plant. And you can see how slick, and these balls of ice were all over the top. Kind of a weird phenomenon. I guess it happens in Lake Michigan quite regularly. It doesn't happen in Lake Erie too often, but the way the ice had formed, there were a lot of these, it looked like almost bowling ball size balls of ice. So it was very slippery, but our guys were able to bring these lines out. You can see the bottom left picture of 2 out of the 3 lines that were eventually installed. And the bottom right picture was taken probably around midnight or so when we had that first line of water going into the bypass operation. So you can see how we concocted these 3 pumps on the top picture. The 3 suction lines are going off into the distance out onto the lake, and these galvanized pieces of pipe are the discharge lines going from the pumps to our wet well. And the bottom left picture shows the 3 different discharges into our wet well. So that's about 6 or 7 million gallons per day equivalent in the bottom left picture. And then eventually, Thursday afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we have some additional screens inside our water plant, and the bottom right picture is just showing some of the ice that had broken through. And when you saw the ice that had broken through, it was in long, narrow strips, which really showed how it was icing of, in between the intake grates, that as it broke through, it came through and then was caught in some other screens and then removed from our system. We use social media quite a bit to get this information out, and it worked very well for us. We had a Facebook page that we had been using for, I don't know, a couple of years, year and a half, 2 years, and had about 200 likes on the Facebook page before the start of this event. Within the 24 hours or so of the event, the 200 likes increased to almost 1,750 likes. And when we started sending information out, 10 o'clock Wednesday evening, we sent out a note, no real changes, we'll let you know, what's going on. And within 20 minutes or half an hour, it was well over 1,000 people had seen that update. So social media worked incredibly for us. I can't remember the total impressions isn't the right word, but the total reach that we had as a result of social media, it was, I think we hit 8,000 or 10,000 people just by sending out the Facebook information. And we have a communications person on staff, and she was working to respond as best as possible, but to at least coordinate, try to start coordinating messages, because one of the things that had happened is we are a bulk supplier of water. So we supply water to the city of Medina, and then the city of Medina provides the water to the individual customers here. And each of the individual jurisdictions would have had a different situation. They might have had more water or less water in their tanks. They might have had interconnections with other jurisdictions. So each was in a different situation. So if, I know you here in Medina City went onto a boil water alert, while other jurisdictions didn't because they had a different situation. So one of the things that we were working hard to coordinate was making sure that the customers, wherever they were, understood to whom they should ask their questions. Got a lot of positive email responses who enjoyed our, or appreciated, as much better, appreciated how we were updating our customers. Let's see. There we go. I'm sure you guys all saw headlines. So, path forward. What are we doing to help limit the situation from occurring again? Now, this is, I hate using the term perfect storm. It's so overused. But so many things have to come together to have something like this happen. But what we're doing to make sure that, to reduce the chances of it impacting customer in the future, we're modifying our ability to how we push water back out to these intakes if we need to push water back out. One of the things that as we modify our ability to push it out, we'll basically be able to have more force to push that water out harder to better break free of this ice. Another thing that we've been doing since this issue is, as you know, in the wintertime, it's cold. So water utilities don't like to keep a lot of water in their storage tanks because there's more chance for icing if the water is turning over that much more slowly. So we have changed the operation where we are keeping the tanks more full so that there are more hours to respond if there is a situation such as this. We had kept one of those 3 pumps for an additional month, so it's about now is about when we're supposed to return that. And we have the relationship in place with the pump supplier, where this situation first occurred at about, 9 p.m., as I said, on Tuesday. And we didn't call that pump supplier until about 3 or so on Wednesday. Well, if this situation was to start happening again, one of the first things we do would we'd be calling them. Longer term, I talked about bubbling the air back out. We are making some modifications, or we will in the spring once the weather gets warmer, we get the divers out there. We'll make some modifications to those air, the ability to bubble the air back out to agitate it more to prevent this chance from happening. And then we're looking at a lot of other options. See, the way a utility works is we charge a rate for the sale of water, and that rate covers our operating expenses, and then it also covers the capital improvement expenses. So we don't want to just jump into any solution. I mean, an immediate solution that we could do, we could put heaters out on our intake grates. But those heaters cost $500,000, $1 million, something like that. And do we want to just spend $1 million to put a heater out there that would address this one situation? Or should we do something else? We've got a third intake that we haven't been using. It was a small intake. Maybe we rehabilitate that one and make that one able to draw water again. Or maybe we add additional storage tanks or clear well capacity, which are basically more tanks. And so maybe we add more tanks that help us in the long run to get through a situation such as this. Or maybe we look into interconnections with other water producers. Cleveland, Elyria, Lorraine, all of those water producers are not far from our main lines, and they're very close to our bulk customers. So maybe we make some sort of interconnections. We are exploring, we're looking into all of these options right now. We have not made a selection of which one we intend to do, because what's going to happen is, let's say we do additional clear well capacity, that might be $5 or $6 million. That cost will have to go into the rate. Now granted, if you're not spending the $1 million on heating the intake rates, and you're putting one of those million toward this, the additional clear well capacity, then that helps to reduce that overall cost, and it helps to address other issues. So we need to look into what the right solution is, and right now we're waiting to get through into the spring, so we have our divers go down and see if there's something else that we just don't know about yet at our intake rates. And we just have looked at the intake rates back in September, but maybe something happened. Maybe big bad storm had come in, and we've got some huge rock over the intake rates that we didn't know about that reduced capacity. So we need to understand a little bit more before we make any decisions on the path forward. That is a quick presentation. I guess I was quicker than a half an hour, which I was expecting. So it was about 20 minutes, but that's a quick overview, and I turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. What we're going to do now is just, I have a couple questions for you. You answered a lot of the questions, or most of the questions, I should say, I had on that presentation, so I appreciate you providing that information to the committee and the crowd here. Todd, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is notification. I know you said that, and obviously from what you've displayed here, you guys were trying to do everything possible to not only get your plant back up and running, or at least trying to get some kind of water flow through there at a capacity that not only helps Avon, but the 7 county area of those people that rely on the water as well. I mean, the city of Medina made a big commitment years ago to go from our Lake Medina reservoir to Avon. And so, I mean, we're counting on you guys to feed our residents and our businesses down here. The night that happened, you said here that it was you contacted the city of Medina, what was that, around midnight or something like, or can you bring that back again?
Sure.
Because I think we had a communication breakdown, because I was under the impression that our water superintendent had to call you guys to let you know we were having problems with our tanks at 4:30 in the morning. So what, can you run that back again? Because I mean, that's crucial for us
Sure.
to know as soon as possible,
Right.
so
Right.
we can.
And that was certainly a learning experience that we've had in deciding when an operational issue turns into more than an operational issue. So we might have a hiccup at the plant, and we'll deal with the hiccup, and there's enough buffering capacity in the tanks that there's an easy way that the customers are never affected.
Mhm.
And in retrospect, we should have at some point said, okay, this is no longer just an operational issue. This is an issue that we need to get the information out. We didn't, unlike maybe a fire department or police department that writes down everything that happens. I don't have a documented history, but from what I was told is that I believe we had talked with
Bill.
your staff, Bill, around the midnight time frame, and
Okay.
said something to the effect of, we're having some issues at our plant, can you not draw as much from your speed tanks?
Mm.
I believe is the way
Okay.
that it happened.
All right.
Now, the way I understand it is somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning, as we were still working through the situation, Bill came back and said, whoa, the speed tanks really are getting low, hey, look, now what's going on?
Mhm.
So I don't know if we might have downplayed the situation a little bit more than we should have at
Mhm.
midnight.
Mhm.
But by 4 in the morning, as we were seeing, hey, we've not been pumping the speed tanks, it's not freeing up more quickly, let's really bring this out into a much larger affair.
Okay.
So that is a learning experience that we have certainly had,
Oh.
and we did have, I'm sure you've probably heard that we had a meeting among all of the utility type folks
Mhm.
to whom we provide the water. We had that late last month,
Mhm.
and that was one of the discussion points that we had is
Okay.
let's make sure to get the information out.
Right.
We're working on making sure everybody has cell phone numbers so that if, at 3 in the morning,
Yeah.
we can make sure that, okay, I'm gonna call Pat Patton or Nino.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like we were kind of behind the 8 ball. I understand you don't want to have these guys get panicked or anything like that, but
Right.
it seemed like we were behind the 8 ball, and the mayor and his administration were running around to make it happen because we weren't, I don't want to say we weren't prepared, but we were looking for options to keep that flow going,
Right.
again, to supply to the customers.
Sure.
in that, you talked about 5 years ago, you had something similar, and you were able to back up and push that ice back out.
Right.
So I appreciate the presentation on the short term and the long term. So that, I mean, that was gonna, obviously, one of my questions, how are you gonna correct this?
Right.
Because, like you said, again, we're at your mercy, and I know you guys are doing everything you can to not have this happen again.
And just, if I can interrupt.
Sure.
The difference, one of the differences between 5 years ago and now is we had some pumps put in place that we could actually push this water back out. So we thought that we had enough more force, we'd be able to break it free. And as that night was rolling along and we were saying, wow, we're not breaking it free, that's when things started to, 4 in the morning, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the morning, we're like, this is something different than we expected.
And you brought up another intake, is that off the old plant, or?
We have 2 right now.
Okay.
There's a third intake, which was, I think it was the original intake. And that intake, it's a smaller intake. We've let it fall into a state of disrepair because now we have 2 bigger intakes.
Right.
So that's one of the things that's worth looking at is, okay, it is a small intake, but is it enough? It's shallower, it's not as far out.
Okay.
So the good thing about that is that in a situation such as this, when the temperature is changing, usually you have ice in close, and you have the open water further out. So though we might not want to use that intake in the summertime, because if the wind's coming from the north, you get all this stirring up of the water, the quality of the mud is going to be worse the shallower it is. However, in a situation such as this, you'll have the ice cover there, it's nice and calm, and you can potentially draw the water in from there. So that's one of the options we're looking at.
Okay. I mean, like I said in the presentation, you did answer a lot of the questions I had. I mean, one of the big things was that communication, which it sounds like hopefully you guys will address and fine tune that in the future. Brian, did you have any questions for Todd while I'm going through my notes here to make sure I?
No, not right now. Thanks for coming out.
Certainly.
Administration, Mayor?
Are there not pressures that show you how much water is coming through that intake, and would there not be some signal or notification as that ice is building up saying something's wrong here?
What we measure is we measure the level of the well, how many feet deep of water there is. And
I'm sorry, sir, in the clear well or in the intake?
in the intake, in the wet well. So in prior to where the pumps are that pull the water in, they're pulling it from the wet well, from the lake to the wet well through the pumps. So we measure the wet well levels, and those levels were decreasing. One of the things we are doing, and I did not mention in the presentation, is our operators are physically now writing down, it's like every hour or something, what those wet well levels are. So they're thinking about, okay, it's at 10.2 feet right now. It's at 9.3 feet, it's at 8.2 feet. Oh my gosh, it's going down. Let's get that call going quick. So that is something that we are looking at, where our operators are much more on top of that to try to catch it more quickly if it is starting to ice up. But right now, just one thing to be clear about is the ice is really far out in the lake now. Lake Erie is 90-something% ice covered right now. So whenever there's a full sheet of ice over this lake, or especially over our intakes, it's an insulating blanket. We don't have to worry about it right now. Not that I'm trying to say that this wasn't a big issue, but yes, we're looking at what the wet well levels are. Our operators are writing that down so that it's physically, right here in the front of their head while they're thinking about it. And then right now, since it's been as cold as it has, it's good for us.
Because I don't have the technical knowledge, but it would seem to me that the sooner you are aware that that's starting to block, then as you're trying your backflow or your air or any of these other things, it's much easier to remove a small piece of ice rather than half a grade of ice.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
certainly. And what, unfortunately, this whole thing about frazzle ice, there has been a lot of research done. Well, let me rephrase that. There's been research done, but it's not been well distributed or published. And places like the Army Corps of Engineers have some data on it. We're looking at it. We're trying to better understand it. But one of the things that we're learning is that you don't want the water to be flowing too slowly, and you don't want the water to be flowing too quickly. If it's either way could cause the ice to build up. You almost want that sweet spot, you know? So if we are starting to notice the problem and we can't push it back, or we can at least slow down the rate to the right level so that it's hopefully not icing as quickly.
Anything else from the administration?
No, just to say, Todd, with respect to the Clearwell, there's not an alarm system like with our tanks. We're used on our end to have the laptop signal alarm or call a phone on those levels, so there's nothing like that. So it's a physical observation and measuring of the wet wells, what they're doing now.
You know, I'm not sure. I know it's on our SCADA system, our computer system, that the operators, in the way our system works, is we've got one operator there 24/7. So if the operator's not physically in front of the operating screen, he's out on rounds going, to make sure that everything's looking correctly, doing the physical inspections, and then he gets back to the operating screen. So there probably is an alarm. Actually, let me rephrase that. I believe there is an alarm. As you know, I got called in at midnight, and 2 or 3 in the morning, I'm hearing these alarms going off. I was a little tired, and I don't exactly remember which alarm was which, but I feel pretty confident that there was an alarm there.
Do you have any idea when you think, I mean, obviously, hopefully you won't have to worry about it again this year, but would you pinpoint this year you would probably have a backup plan? I know you have a pump still on rental.
Right.
Is that something that you maybe consider purchase, or?
The company, Xylem Dewatering Solutions, they have about 6 locations within a 6-hour radius of us. And each of those locations tries to have at least 3 or 4 of the types of pumps that we need. So I don't think owning one of those pumps is the correct solution, but now that we have this relationship with them, and we, they're in our Rolodex, if within a few hours we're saying, hey, this is a problem, we're gonna get on the phone and call them, and if the Painesville office can't get it to us, the Pittsburgh office can. If the Pittsburgh office can't, Buffalo can.
Right.
So that having a private sector partner, I think, is the right solution for that. And it, on a financial standpoint, but also just on a resources standpoint, they're going to have several. And as you saw, we put 3 in place. The situation might get worse. We might want 4,
Right.
Or it might not be that bad and only 1. So I think the private sector partner is a better solution than that.
I've just, this happened not to this magnitude within 5 years. And, this is really the first I've learned about frazzle ice. But to me, twice in 5 years, it's got a little worse than the last time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and taking that the step further, for you or me at our house, it's an inconvenience. I mean, that's all it was an inconvenience for most private residences. However, the people that have medical conditions and need water, the businesses that are relying on water, there was certainly a financial impact, and more than just the Starbucks that had to close down for that day. I mean,
Oh, yeah, we definitely had businesses
Right.
impacted. Residents, I think, did well with what they had, but, I came over here and watched the administration here. We sat in front and watched these tanks fluctuate. They were lucky to have some initiative to find some different connections to keep the water flowing, not at the capacity we want, but keep the lines open and, getting the basics out there. And, I just felt like our hands were tied pretty much,
Oh, yeah.
we're relying on you. So, we're gonna look at different avenues for our own backup plan. If something would happen like this again, or something happens to the main line coming down, that, we're better prepared as well.
And, the inexpensive short-term solutions, some of them, for instance, talking about bubbling the air back out, many jurisdictions, that's all they do. They just bubble air all year round, not all year round, all winter long, and that's all they have to do. So, and that's a few $1,000 fix. It's not that expensive. So making that change once it's warm enough to have the divers come out there, that could completely resolve the problem forever. However, the longer term solutions, the more expensive solutions, we're going to look at.
When do you think you'll have something back on midsummer, fall, maybe?
Yeah,
or-
something like that is where essentially we need to get the divers out there this spring and make sure that there's not something that we just don't know about. And once we have the divers physically looking at what the intakes look like, then we can start making a path forward of what makes the most sense. And we're in the business to sell water.
Sure.
So we obviously want to be able to sell water 24/7. We have a slightly different way of doing business than Cleveland has. Cleveland's got 4, water plants. They've got huge redundancy. We don't have that redundancy. But our cost structure is much different than Cleveland. So we are trying to get that right balance. And these low-cost solutions, great. Let's implement those to make sure to cut down the chances of there having a problem like this again. The more expensive solutions, over the summer, we'll work through this and figure out what makes the most sense.
Now, did any of the Cleveland intakes or any of the other water suppliers that pull from Lake Erie have similar situation during this time? Or?
Yes. What I had heard that, there was actually a piece in the paper of Lake County.
Okay.
Lake County had it around the same time we did. Ashtabula had it. That was in the paper as well, I believe. I heard Cleveland might have had a little bit of icing in one of theirs, and out west, I think it was Ottawa, also had the situation, all within a few days of each other. Some of it was over the Christmas holiday, some of it was within a couple of days of when it happened to us. But going back to your question, when we had the meeting with the other, our bulk customers, we said, listen, what are you guys looking at for interconnections? Because if a situation such as this was to happen, water could flow either direction with an interconnection. Maybe we're connected with Cleveland, and Cleveland has a specific certain issue. We can flow water to them sometimes, or if we have an issue, they can flow water to us. So we do have we're talking with the other jurisdictions on that, as well as the other options we talked about.
I'll open it up to the public, or let me start with other council members. Gentlemen, you...
The one question I do have is with redundancy, and I believe you just touched on it, where are we physically connected with Cleveland, Lorraine, and the other ones yet? Or is that something that you're still in conversations with?
I don't specifically have an interconnection with Cleveland or the others, but what I have is, for instance, I provide water to Sheffield Lake. Sheffield Lake also gets water from Lorraine, and if Lorraine boosts up their pressure, they can push a little bit of water to us through Sheffield Lake. Similarly, Sheffield Village gets water from Elyria as well as us, and they could potentially push water either direction. You go down to North Ridgeville gets water from both Elyria and from us, and they can push water a little bit either direction. But none of them are big interconnections. So as a bulk supplier, what I'm looking to do is what would be the cost of a big connection that I could push a lot of water in one direction or another to, if I had a situation such as this, or, to bring it one step further, as we were dealing with this situation here in Northeast Ohio, look at what was happening in West Virginia with the chemical spill. So, there is any number of things that could happen. You could have the chemical spill. You could have another blackout. You could have whatever. So there are a variety of reasons that could cause a massive outage. And maybe this outage is localized, where Cleveland's intake might be where the chemical spill is. And maybe some big, horrible, nasty things coming down the Cuyahoga River. Or maybe a blackout is regionalized where we're on one cell that we have the power, or we don't have the power, and Cleveland's on another one, the other way. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why I really like the idea of interconnections, and that's one of the first things that I'm looking into, because it resolves so many potential issues. Personally, I like that option best.
Yeah.
But I don't want to bias I don't want to bias the outcome, until we can actually look at it.
I don't know, my opinion is, I think that that's probably the best of all the solutions, because a lot more benefit can come from that than putting some heated grates out there.
Yeah, and me, I've been here for about 3 years, and I came from Northern Virginia, the DC area. And in the DC area, lots of big, huge water utilities, and we all had interconnections with each other for situations such as this.
Thank you.
Bill, do you have?
I agree with Paul about the interconnection, because that makes a lot of sense. I guess, I'm surprised, and the one thing I'm surprised about, I guess, is this. if there was these low-cost solutions that you're talking about, $1,000 or so for you, and this happened 5 years ago, if I was supplying water in that quantity to that many people, and for that amount of money, I could have put in that kind of a remedy, as a business decision, I'm surprised that wouldn't have been, you know, pretty high up on the list of places to spend $1,000. As well as, I don't think inconvenience is a good word either. When you inconvenience to residents and business is probably an accurate term to use for the impact that what happened had on the city, because we have a lot of big water users here. I mean, Sandridge is one of the big ones, as well as we have a lot of residents that I don't think, I didn't sense it as an inconvenience. I sensed it as a pretty monumental issue that was remedied by the administration. And without their work, water is really the lifeblood of the community, whether you're business or residential. And without that, that was a dilemma, not an inconvenience. And so I'm surprised that there was a solution that was that inexpensive that could have been a remedy, because a lot of what you talked about sounds good, but it's all after the fact. But it's not just after this fact, it's after the previous fact, right?
And if may I respond? Or, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I had mentioned earlier was that one of the changes that we made for increasing our ability to push water back out, we thought was a sufficient change, and we learned it wasn't. So we're making additional changes to be able to push more water. The air bubbling that out, again, that was one of those things where, from what we'd understood in the past, we thought that would be sufficient. But in talking with other jurisdictions, we're like, well, you know what, we actually bring our water, you know, our air all the way back out to a certain location. So each of these, we had made changes since the last event, and we thought that those changes were going to cover it. Obviously, it didn't. And so that's why, I mean, you know, we're now talking, okay, you know, you do the belts, you do the suspenders, you do something else to, you know, you hit the hands to hold the pants up, to make sure that you have not only, you know, what you think is going to work, but in a second solution and then a third solution, because water is important. And I think you might have misunderstood what I was saying with respect to inconvenience. I was saying for most residential customers, it's probably just an inconvenience, but for businesses, it was much more than an inconvenience. For people that had to have water for medical purposes, it's much more than an inconvenience. And I take my role seriously. My company takes its job seriously, and you know, to me, it's an embarrassment. You know, if I'm here to provide water, I didn't provide water, you know, during those 36 or 42 hours, and that's not the way that I want this organization to have a public face. So that's part of why it's not just these simple solutions. It's what are those next steps? Because I don't want the situation to occur again, just like you don't want the situation to occur again.
Well, no, but the technology that's involved in this can't be so local. I mean, it can't be that unique to here. I mean, there must be people pumping water out of the Great Lakes all over the northeastern part of the United States. There must be people doing this in hundreds or thousands of systems. It's surprising to me to hear that it is just so unusual, you know, like we didn't think this would ever happen again, and now we have to come up with ways to deal with it. Isn't it more widespread than that? I mean, wouldn't this be occurring in other places, other times, and people would have figured these solutions out and put them in place?
From what I understand with respect to specifically icing, and again, I don't want to implement a solution that's just to address ice. I'd like to implement a much broader solution. Some places have put in these heaters. Other places have put in the air bubblers. Other places have made modifications to their intake grates. For instance, I might take out a specific number of the bars to the grates, which would then limit the chance for ice buildup, but would allow more debris to come in, which would have to be screened out later. So From what I understand, there is no silver bullet solution. People do different things and have different luck in different areas. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn from others. We're trying to investigate what makes sense, and we're trying to probably do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, to make sure that we don't, get caught into a situation such as this.
You've been doing this for 60 years?
My organization has been providing water since the 20s, and we've been providing water to others for 60 years, since the 50s.
Thanks.
I'll open up to the public. Anybody out there that might have a question that might not have been touched already? Yes, sir.
Jim Meadows from Sandwich Foods. It is difficult for me to hear the word inconvenience, because that inconvenience was somewhere between $200,000 to $300,000 it cost us for this event. So it was really quite painful, and we're still trying to figure out all those numbers, because we have customers that are thinking about leaving us because we couldn't supply product for them. So it's not just the financial piece, it's outreaching now to my business, to all my customers. Are we reliable? Can you supply me my product? They're all the way across the nation. They don't care about Lake Erie, they don't care about ice, they want their product. So it was much, much bigger. But Todd, I appreciate you coming down with the information you had. But I do have one really important question, and that is timeline. Because you kind of laid out the easy ones. The tough ones are ahead of you. And if you're going to talk with the city of Cleveland, I know that's going to take months. And then if you decide to make a decision, it's going to take you many months to put that interconnection in. I want to know what kind of timeline you think your business is on, and will you have a more permanent solution in place before ice comes again to Lake Erie, which is basically, what, 9 months from now, 10 months? And how committed are you to a timeline that will have a very permanent situation? Because I like where you're going. I think interconnection solves all those things you can dream up that has happened, right? And I think you're on the right track, but I know from my business, that takes a lot of time and effort to pull all that together, right? And all the politics that goes with it. And I just try to understand your timeline around that topic.
Sure, Jim. And Jim, you've made a couple of really important points, and I completely agree with you that some of these are longer-term solutions. The simple solutions, yes, those, by the time we have ice again next year, those are easily adopted. There are other, a little bit more difficult, but still relatively simple solutions is, okay, for instance, we're right next door to Bay Village. And how hard is it to have, one fire hose connect, or one hydrant connected to another hydrant through a fire hose? Those easy solutions, all of those can be put in place by next year. The more difficult solutions, such as interconnection with Cleveland or Lorraine or Elyria, additional storage capacity, none of those are going to be implemented by next year. There's no physical way that they could happen. Now, my hope would be by, not the next winter, but the following winter, that I could have these types of solutions in place. And that's where I'm shooting for right now, is to make decisions this summer, say, okay, what are the best decisions? And then I've already, as I said before, I have reached out to Cleveland, and I've reached out to Elyria. And it takes a while to work through all of those processes to see how we might be able to work together on something like this.
Because it's obvious during the situation, what you did do, right? You build a road, right?
Right.
Excavated out, 10, 12 feet, it looked like on your picture, brought pumps in. So if you put your mind to it, you can do about anything.
Right.
And have an interconnection to Cleveland before ice comes next year, I think could be done if you're committed to it and get focused on it and get after it. That's what I'm really trying to understand. So I heard what I didn't want to hear from you, but I just wanted to see where you were on your timeline, because we as a business, as Sandwich, have a big decision to make about how reliable the source is, and can we sustain here in Medina with the unknown. And so we're trying to figure out what decisions you're going to be making and when you're making, and what the city's thinking about doing, so that we can make our decisions.
Right.
And they're big decisions.
And if I can follow up, Jim, the thing that worked really well was this bypass situation. Those bypass pumps can be to us in a number of hours. And that is the immediate solution if we start to have icing, is we get those bypass pumps in, we start pumping 6, 8, 10 million gallons, And that supplements, and really, they're, you said it yourself, it comes down to when you're in crunch time, you get ingenious. We were easily able to get 6 or 7 million going into there. If we need to get more into there, we're going to get more into there. So that's the immediate solution is, okay, if 6 or 8 million gallons is not enough, you get 10 or 12 million gallons coming through there. And that's the short-term solution. And going back to if you're serious enough, we're serious, Cleveland might not be serious right now, or Lorraine, or whomever else. So therefore, it takes, it takes two to work together. We're extending, our end to try to work together, and we're hoping that they're going to extend theirs.
Todd, how close is your possible connection with Cleveland? How close is it from 1 year? Obviously, you're gonna need to put in a larger line. Are we talking 5 miles? Are we talking
I'm not exactly
3
sure.
blocks, or what are we doing there?
My understanding is it's on the order of a few miles. I have requested some information from Cleveland on that, and I've not received that information. And most people aren't freely willing to say, hey, these are exactly where my pipes are. So I'm trying to get that information, but my understanding is that we're talking a couple of miles. And, a couple of miles, you've got to, once you can come to an agreement, you got to get the easements, you got to, do the design, you do the construction. This is a long process.
But you are committed to throwing as many pumps out there as you need to fill up your wet well that will give us enough volume down here that we can help out Sandridge and we can help out the hospital.
Right.
And our basic users as well. So you're committed to that.
Going back to what I mentioned to the other council member is, we're in the business to sell water. And we take that role very seriously, and we're very embarrassed by not being able to provide that water. And going back again, it happened 5 years ago. We thought we had made changes that it wouldn't happen again. Obviously, those changes were not sufficient. So that's why we're going to do this, that, and some other things on top of that. Those pumps, we think, it can't be just a silver bullet solution. That's why we have to look for other longer-term solutions. But by doing 6 or 8 or 10 different things, we feel relatively confident that you can never say never, but much lower chance of it ever happening in the future. Or a situation, not just it.
Sure. Anybody else? Jim, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have any more questions for Todd?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Anybody else out there have any last questions? So, Todd, I appreciate the presentation and look forward to hearing from any information you can provide us for future improvements.
Certainly.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Appreciate
I'm
it.
going
Thanks,
to
Todd.
give a couple minutes so he can get out of here. If somebody wants to hold off for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, so if someone wants to go out and get a drink of water like Todd gets his stuff together and gets out of here.
I think.
No.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was other close to solar. We're in the same place, so in Boyle, get off their boil. And I don't know if that would just strictly do that. Your water. I don't see I see option 1, then you go down to 3. There's 2 stuff. Okay, so there's 2 options. Well, it is an option 2. 3 with the 2.
But there's a problem there, and I would be honest with you.
Right, you know what I mean?
Thanks again.
Thank you, Todd.
All right, everybody, we're gonna gear up here again and all right. Number 2 on the agenda is City of Medina's action plan or options for emergency backup water supply. I know, Pat, you provided us up here with a little background and some options. I don't know if you, we'll have you go over those here momentarily, but as you all may know, we scurried around, the administration scurried around to try to find a connection to keep water flowing in our city, and I commend them all for coming up with some solutions to temporarily help us out, not to the capacity some of the major companies needed to perform, but to a point that everybody still had water flowing into their homes or into their businesses. I asked last month the administration that I was going to hold a meeting and ask them to come up with some options that we might have to put City of Medina in a better position to pull water from every other avenue that we might have. And so I asked the administration to put something together, and they've, Pat Patton, our city engineer here, gave us a comparison of alternative sheets on potable water sources. So I will open that up to Pat here, and we can go, and as a resident and a city councilman, I was thinking myself, what options do we have? Obviously, the performed tying into the county line, wanted to see if we could look at any additional connections besides the ones we currently have. We talked about a mini pump station, Cleveland tie-in, which obviously Todd here at Avon talked about, and I'll let Pat go into what they recommend right now, and city is still researching on a viable option, so this is more of a discussion just to get the ball rolling, to not only have Avon know our concerns and our frustration, so they work on a backup plan. We want one on top of that for our community and see what options we have. So Pat, on that note, I will turn this over to you to give us a little breakdown on the research and any discussion or recommendations you guys are leaning towards.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Just to give folks some background, obviously we get our water from Avon Lake Regional Water. I keep forgetting to change their name. In terms of our usage, over the past 5 years, we average about 3.1 million gallons a day of usage. That's for the entire year. In the past 5 years, we did have a high in 2012 of 3.3 million gallons a day, but 3.1 is about our average, and that is in fact what we used last year, 2013. Our system is divided into 3 pressure districts. Our water is delivered from Avon through our Spieth Road pump station to our Progress Drive pressure district, which is the largest. We use about 1.9, almost 2 million gallons a day in that district.
Pat, how large are our Spieth Road tanks?
There are 2 5 million gallon tanks out there, so 10 million gallons altogether.
And we put that in our major improvement with Avon
We
Lake.
did, we're a part owner of those. The city, Medina County, and rural Lorraine share those tanks. We each paid for them, maintain them. We each have our own pump stations out there adjacent to the tanks.
Sorry.
That's right. The other 2 pressure districts are Lake Road, which is about 0.8 million gallons a day average usage, and South Court, which is 0.4 million gallons a day. I mention that because as we get into this interconnect discussion, we're going to propose some interconnects at various locations around town. But you have to keep in mind that we need to get the water to the right districts to make it all work. We'll get more into that here later. But interconnect is going to be the way to go. That is going to be our recommendation. We feel it's viable for us. Medina County has facilities all around the city. They surround us and are very close to us in a lot of different locations, really. And Medina County has the advantage. They have more than one connection to Avon Lake. Our only connection is the line from Speed Road down through the rail trail to the city, about 6 miles long. Medina County has a couple different inputs from Avon Lake, so there's some redundancy there. The big one, though, is they do have, and this is what saved us that night, they do have an interconnect with the city of Cleveland up on 42 in Brunswick Hills. There's an emergency interconnect. They haven't used it in years. In fact, talking to some folks up there, it's been at least 15 years, I think, since they've used it, but we used it that night. And that really, as I mentioned, saved us from going dry. But through Medina County is a great option because of those two interconnects. That interconnect with Cleveland and the fact that Medina County has some redundancy from Avon. We've identified 3 different areas working with the county. We've met with them several times over the past few weeks. And we've identified 3 different areas where we would like to make the interconnect. 2 of them we use, well, actually all 3 we used that evening. Lake Road is one, and East Smith Road. I mentioned those first. Those are the easiest to accomplish because they're gravity connections, which means the pressure in the county system is higher than the pressure in our system at those points. So all we have to do basically is connect them. We're going to have to put in a vault and a meter and a backflow preventer and that kind of thing. But that's it, and we can get some sufficient water through each of those. We feel we really need a connection up on the northern end of town. First of all, because it's our largest district. That's where our water system starts, and from there we can feed the other districts if necessary. But secondly, that's the closest direct point between the county's emergency connection with Cleveland and our system. So it's a very strategic location in terms of hydraulics. Problem there is our pressures are higher than the county's at that point. This is what required us to use a fire pumper truck that evening to pump water from the county system into ours. To do something more permanent, we're looking at a couple different issues. One is a permanent pump station. A pump station is there just for emergency purposes. That certainly could be accomplished. We do have to find a location for it, which is probably going to be buying some property or getting some sort of agreement from one of the property owners. That's about a $400,000, $410,000 project, and that includes a backup emergency generator that I didn't mention, but the 2 gravity connections are about $25,000 each. Another option that we're looking at, something Nino was working on, and it's a good idea, is that same concept at that same location would be a portable skid. It wouldn't be a permanent station, a permanent building. It would be something we could deliver on site. There are some potable water systems with NSF, which is EPA approved piping, that we could, again, just hook up to the hydrants, drop this off when we need it, turn it on, and provide it there. We're still working on, first of all, we're trying to get some costs. We don't really have a good feel for cost. No doubt it's going to be cheaper than the permanent pump station. And second is EPA rules and regulations. There's some, we got to make sure that they're going to sign off on that. But that could be a very good solution. And if it's viable, I'm sure it'll be much cheaper than that $410,000. I did want to mention one thing, bring it to your attention. The city of Cleveland and Medina County do have a formal agreement between the 2 for that emergency connection. The county prosecutor now is reviewing that agreement to see if they have the ability to feed us water as necessary, or potentially if we're going to need to go back to the city of Cleveland and work out some sort of agreement. We'll find out. That might be coming down the pipe. Hopefully it's not an issue, but that might be something we'll have to accomplish. So that does it for that. Pardon me?
For the public that's here that doesn't have a copy of this, if you can talk about, you said 3.1 million is our average gallons used per day.
Mm-hmm.
These 3 interconnects would provide us with.
This is what more than we're proposing 3.7 million gallon, 1.4 million gallons a day into the lake system, which is almost double what they use on average. And then into our Progress system would be 2.3 million, which is more than we use on average, which would give us the ability, and from the Progress system, we can feed the South Court system and take care of that.
Okay.
The other option we looked at, and basically was just to look at everything, was we've been asked about using this Lake Medina, the city's water plant in Lake Medina, specifically a portable water plant that, basically we can treat water and pump it in an emergency situation. This is quite expensive. I did pursue, I got some pricing, and this is very rough pricing, but some estimates, and I looked at 2, 3, and 4 million gallon a day options, thinking that, for instance, if we did the 2 connections, gravity connections for 50,000, maybe we only need a 2 million gallon a day plant there, and we would meet our needs. That's still, that's the cheap, the less expensive one is $2.5 million. That right there caused us to pause. I think it might not be a good option, but we did speak and push the EPA about it. They did discourage us from pursuing this. The thing is, it's just because when you're talking a water treatment plant, whether it's one day or 365 days a year, we would be a water treatment plant operator. And for the EPA and for us to be assured that the water we are treating meets all the EPA requirements, there's a lot of testing, we would have to run this every day. I mean, it's not something you can turn on and be good to go. For us to know that when it's needed, it's potable water, acceptable for human consumption, it's got to run every day. There's also issues with the equipment. You can't just let it sit. These are, the filters, it could dry out. There's all kinds of different, things that if we're going to do it, you would have to, maybe you just do it at low flow, but it would have to run every day or, regularly, maybe weekly or something. Once we do that, we're a water operator, and there's no way around all the testing rules and regulatory requirements of the EPA as any other operator. It's just something we're going to have to accept if that's the option we want to pursue.
Pat, real quick, can you explain to the public, I mean, we still have our old water facility right next to our old water source, Lake Medina. Can you explain briefly why we can't use our old water station?
The water plant?
The water plant, I'm sorry.
Well, we abandoned the water plant, I shouldn't say abandoned, we stopped treating water there. It's been about 12 years now, over 13 years. Yeah, 2002. Most of the equipment there hasn't been used, is out of date, is obsolete. One of the reasons we, council elected not to, we were looking at options, either go with Avon Lake or expand our own water plant. One of the concerns we had with our own plant is capacity. It needed to be made much larger to meet the needs of the city. And second was water quality. Our plant was very old. It hadn't really had any kind of major upgrades in a couple of decades. And we were really having trouble meeting the water quality requirements because the EPA, they get more and more stringent every year. And this was 12 years ago. But physically, I mean, most of the equipment's not there. There's no way to go turn it on today. In conclusion, our recommendation, EPA is recommending that we do the interconnects as our main resolution to this, and we agree. We're going to request that the council authorize us to go ahead and complete the 2 interconnects, one at Lake Road and one at East Smith, immediately as soon as we can.
When you say as soon as we can, something we can do this season, so we have
Yeah,
something in place before next
Yeah,
winter?
It's a really simple, yeah.
So that's
about,
it.
I would say 3 months from the go we have.
Okay.
And as far as, that's basically 2/3 of the solution. We
Right.
still need to get the last part. And actually, that 2/3, I want to point out, that's a lot more than most water systems have. Most people don't have full redundancy. We'd like to try and achieve that. But with that 2/3 capacity plus what we have every day in storage in our water tanks, we can ride out a lot. But we do want to try and get the full redundancy. We'd like to keep pursuing the idea of this portable skid system and see if that's a viable option. If it is, I'm sure that's probably going to be our recommendation, because Nino points out that's going to be a fraction of the cost of the permanent station. But we just have to get more information before we can make a recommendation.
Okay. Do you have any questions, Brian? Well, I appreciate that. I don't want the public to think that we haven't thought about a backup plan because we really only have one source. We have talked about it. It is on our future projected projects. But this situation we had in early January has obviously kicked it up to the forefront. You know, our system's fairly new for water systems, so I don't know if the Frazzle ice was something that maybe we didn't think about, but, you know, I appreciate the administration putting something together fairly quickly. It looks like a good solution, quick solution, I think, for part of the problem. And like you said, that looking at that mobile pump station to get that volume up to where we feel more comfortable. So I appreciate you putting that together. Mary, do you have any additional comments or any comments at all?
Well, no, just for the public's benefit, because we know, because we deal with it in our planning, but the design and specifications were, according to our plan, were to take place in 2014, and then the actual build in 15. So in essence, we've moved it up a year to do the design, the specs, and the actual installation all within this given year, so that I don't have to call Jim or the hospital again and tell them that we've got ourselves into a bind here. And that's why I administratively, and I think Nino and Patrick stand united, that although most places may not have full redundancy, it's important enough for us to keep our businesses and to keep our hospital in business and to keep our people safe, that if we can do this within the budget dollars that we have, that it's necessary to do it.
Yes.
Pat, the $410,000 for the pump station, you mentioned it might require purchase of property or easements or whatever. That doesn't include any of that, right? That would be
Correct.
additional. Any idea, any way to ballpark how much, I mean, we talking 50,000, another 100,000?
I wouldn't think it's that much, really.
Okay.
You know, Mary was asking me earlier how big, we're talking about a big shed. It's not a
Okay.
big building. So we don't need a whole lot of land. But it does need to be somewhere, you know, in the North Port corridor, near the Kmart Plaza, or, you know, we thought of Huntington. The city and the county both have water lines on Huntington. They're fairly close together. That's a residential area, though. I don't know if it's the best fit, but it seems to be more open land there, so.
Well, again, we don't want to shed out where people are going to see it, you know, on the edge of the
Right.
road or whatever, so we'd have to talk to one of the businesses and, you know, would you mind if we, you know, paid you X for this property to do this? But that's where the portable obviously eliminates all of that, eliminates the expense and the appearance of something like that.
Council members, Bill, I saw you had your hand up.
So, Patrick, just clarify this for me. If we go ahead and we built this, and we spent the money, we got it done, would that really then what you know they were talking about from Avon Lake, all the things they're going to do in case this happens again, that would really negate the impact of all that, correct? I mean, if in fact next year they have the same Frazzle ice problem, and we have this in place, we can accommodate all the water needs in the city, regardless of what they do in the meantime to fix that issue. Is that?
Yes.
As long as the Cleveland water line doesn't break.
Right.
That's,
It's true, yeah.
Although I
Yeah.
suppose they could come up with some sort of crazy scenario where it might not work, but that, for all intents and purposes, yeah. You know,
So all the conversation that we had earlier, really, if you guys can get all this stuff in place in short order, once the money's appropriated.
We don't want to depend on somebody else
Right.
to solve this
Right.
for us. So we are looking at every option, reasonable option, even unreasonable, if you look at the 2.5 to 3 million.
We crossed that one off.
Great, okay. We did too, yeah. But in any event, we wanted to look at as many options as we could and then find a way that, not to limp us along, but to provide the city with the water, and we're confident that these will.
And just lastly, the idea that, which talked about the skid,
Yes, sir.
that, if that worked out, then that would not require that we had a permanent place, correct?
Correct.
Right,
We
that's
could
what we're
just
trying to
move it,
avoid.
you would move it, you know, it's kind of like a mash unit, you could just move it into place.
Right.
Right.
Use it
Keep
while you
one of the
needed it.
garages. When we need it, we bring it out. Yes, sir.
And is that something that other jurisdictions have done? Is that a?
Yes.
That's not something you guys just brought up, I mean, that's a.
Well, there's two things. We went on boil alert because we went to the pumper. I think we talked about that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been on boil alert. The notification piece was huge because had we had more information early on, we wouldn't have had to
I don't
devise a
interrupt you,
pumper.
but did we have that information early on that he was talking about?
No,
Okay, that's,
not to the point where our water superintendent called back after getting up at 4:30, not hearing anything, and looking at the laptop and seeing the levels were down, and he made the
They
call.
did call at midnight.
He called
Yeah.
and said, we had some problems, throttle back, so they did. Bill got up on his own at 4:30, he saw the levels had not pumped any higher and called with concern, and then that's when he started learning the significance and called the mayor. And the mayor called the meeting at 7 in his office, and we went from there. So we were into the event at that point pretty deep. So the notification part would have helped, because then we started calling Cleveland, got in with the corporation who has portable water connections, as we explained to Mr. Meadows and Mr. Bingham-Rakovich, with the hospital, that we didn't want to go on boil. So these connections with the NFS approval allows you to pump water through it and not have boil because it's sanitary.
right.
We had two of those connections. The third one, at that point, was 11 PM that we needed, and that's why we chose to use the pumper truck. But
And just for clarification for some of the folks here, each of those connections was 500 gallons
per minute,
per minute.
correct.
And if we didn't use the pumper truck, we were looking at 1,500 gallons per minute, but we were using,
We didn't meter that last one, but it was a little bit more significant.
okay.
It
But
was
we were
more than the
using much more
500.
than that,
Correct.
than the 1,500.
Right, 3 million gallons a day is about
No,
2,200
but
gallons a day.
we were throttled back, but we knew how much water we were using in the city, and the 3 connections were not gonna make that without a
Correct.
fire truck.
Right.
Yes,
Right, right, right.
yes.
So that's why that decision was made, because we didn't want to go on boil alert, but the chance was not go on boil alert and run out of water.
Not
totally.
depressurize.
Or-
Nothing to boil.
Exactly.
Correct.
Or
Right.
hook the fire truck up and go through the inconvenience of the boil alert and keep, have a reasonable expectation to keep people in water.
And no offense to Sandwich, but Jim and John both know our first and foremost concern was the hospital and the kidney dialysis and the medical health care.
But the skid would just
That-
be moved out, put in
It can be.
place.
We're having
Right.
dialogue with the same company that brought that connection down that helped us out with
Yeah.
the Lake Road hydrant connections. So with that, there's 8-inch steel lines with the possibility of a sanitary pump that would allow for future pumpage.
It's no boil alert.
Correct.
Pump.
And the other thing is we're putting larger lines than what we put.
Rather than
from
the
hydrant
4-inch.
to hydrant, rather than 4-inch larger, and that gets us these capacities that we're talking about. So, Patrick and Eno have done a great deal of work to study this and find out where we have to get to at the end of the day, we're equal or greater than what we were before.
Pat, you threw out a stat there that the 3.1 million average breaks down to 2,200 gallons per minute, is that what you said?
Approximately, yeah.
Okay, okay. Paul, do you have anything?
No, just thank you, and I agree with the interconnect thing. I think that's the right way to go, because we can get there more quickly.
Yes, in the back corner.
I have a couple questions for Patrick. And I'm not sure if you mentioned this because from back here I didn't hear you. On the last option for Lake Medina, you said you had some rough estimate costs. What was that?
Between 2.5 and 3 million.
Okay, and then, I know that we're not really looking at that seriously, but if we were able to find funding for that, is it possible to have that connection go directly to our industry customers like Sandridge and Owens and Plastic Pack that are huge water users, so they wouldn't really have to rely on other lines?
Directly?
Well, yeah, you said if we got that back up and running again, the EPA said you have to run it all the time. So my thought was, is if you set that up, we were able to find grant dollars or capital bill request or some other kind of funding to help fund that, can we tie that directly to our industry so they don't have to worry about water coming from Avon Lake and be shut down?
Well, Lake Medina is the north part of our town. The only thing to do direct would be a new line from there down to where our industry is, so we already have lines, you know, it'd be part of the network of our system.
So could they tie into that then? and-
Well, they already are tied into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Part
so
of-
it's
part
just
of
a
our
matter
network.
of the cost then of getting that up and running and then,
Or causing the same result at a lower cost, which is what we're studying.
okay. So then the other question was on the direct connections with the Lake Road and East Smith Road, then we were going to do that, would that be enough to sustain Sandridge and these other companies so that
Yes.
they don't have to shut down?
Yep.
I'm just trying to think of other options too. so.
Sure.
Anything else, Kimberly?
That's all I had.
Okay. Yes, Dolly?
Yeah, so the interconnects would only be in case of an emergency, is that
Correct,
am I
yeah.
understanding that correct? Okay. Because I know we're locked in for 50 years, a little bit less now with Avon Lake, but I just wondering if there's any kind of thing that we have to use a certain amount of money from, or I'm sorry, a certain amount of water from Avon Lake, or if you could do a permanent, more of a permanent connect with the county.
We don't
and a
have
little
any
bit
minimums,
closer.
but, you know, the county's paying the same amount that we do to Avon, like, there's no cost
Also, it would be any
savings.
savings.
And if we have to use Cleveland water through the county, it's quite a bit more expensive.
Oh, okay, so it wouldn't be a savings. I thought maybe since we were closer to the county, it might be less, but we've
We're
already
both
got.
drawn from the same pool there, so they get
That's
their
what's
water.
confusing too, is like if everybody's drawing from Lake Erie, how come it was frozen one spot but not the other? Or is it because of the equipment that they have?
Well, they maintained that a couple of communities had problems that night, or they surely, in that same area, apparently nowhere near the severity that we did.
Mm-hmm.
But they keep coming back, it was the perfect storm of events that caused this.
It seems kind of weird since it's all coming from the same area, but I guess
They talk about Point
the
Clinton.
section could be different.
He said even if it was ice, that's actually better, because then it's pulling the water from below it, and then they wouldn't have had this problem. But because of the open water, that's what caused this problem for them.
We learned a lot about fragile ice during this event also.
Zero.
Very much.
Any other comments from the public? Anybody else have any
Mark, just a
questions?
quick question.
Yes.
Is council meeting sometime shortly to make decisions on?
Well, what I was gonna bring up here, and I appreciate you asking, normally the process, they'd come with an RCA, it would be assigned probably back to this Water and Utilities Committee. But what I would like to see and request is that when they do put this RCA together, as soon as they can put it together, that it'll go straight to our Finance Committee, where it's all 7 members, and then we'll push it on as quick as we can from there to make, those 2 quick connections, and hopefully they'll have additional information for that 3rd connection. So we are gonna try to get this moving as fast as possible, and just like we kind of put pressure on Avon, we wanna have this done this year, before the season hits next year, so,
We'll have the request in the next finance.
there you go.
For the two
2 connections.
connections. We'll study this 3rd one a little bit more, and as soon as we have the detail to submit that, we'll do a 2nd request with that. But we're right with you. We want to get this done and resolved.
So Jim, basically 2 weeks.
2 weeks could be in front of council for the first 2 connections, and then need more time.
Well,
That-
hold
that's
on,
like
hold on.
2 weeks to finance.
I understand.
Right.
2 weeks later to council.
Council.
And then if we pass it with the emergency clause, then I don't know if we're going to bid it or request
We'll have
a
to make that-
proposal. or- We
Yeah.
got to go through the process.
Yeah, so you got a couple months to
Contractor.
install it, I'm sure.
Right.
Right.
So a month to get it through the
Right.
city, and a
Right,
couple
right.
months, 2 or 3 to get it built and put up.
Right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you're researching the skid mounted,
Yes.
somewhere that'll come through.
Right.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, that's your biggest user, and it's your biggest need, you know?
Mhm.
And I'm sure that's why it's revenue too.
Bless you.
Sure,
Right.
more CPM, you got.
Yeah,
full unit.
yeah, that's what we need to.
Yeah.
But again, that's more of just an acquisition, the expense to acquire it as opposed to the, install and underground and all the other
Bless
stuff
you.
that goes along with these.
And if we had to, I guess, we've identified the area, so if we had to go the route of above ground again, we could do that a lot quicker versus scrambling and figuring,
If we had to call it in.
Correct.
Yes, sir, right.
in the event something were to go down before that, hopefully not.
Right.
And Pat, do you envision the mobile unit, when you still probably need at least an agreement to be able to set it? And wouldn't you really be bringing underground 8-inch lines to this location so
Would
that
be
when you
underground,
have to?
It would be over.
No, we would do it over.
We're talking, if, you're talking about the short term, if something were to happen in between?
No, he's talking about
I'm
the,
talking about the mobile unit.
Right.
That
Oh,
you're thinking about
it'd be
buying.
above ground.
It would be all above ground?
Yes.
There's no plumbing needed to get
No,
8-inch
I mean,
lines?
to hook them up and steel lines,
Yeah.
bump it, it'd be pretty
The
quick.
height is 4-inch, okay?
Then it will, 6 inch, this 4-inch barrel coming up, yeah.
So, I mean, it won't get your 8, it won't get near these capacities. My point is, I think you're gonna have to do some plumbing underground to bring an 8-inch tap up to hit a pump that's designed for 8-inch. And you're gonna need a place to locate that, and you're gonna close the road down,
We would have to close the road down, no doubt,
you know.
yeah.
But you might be able to have land that you don't have to buy, but you
Or
have
just
an
use the
agreement
parking
that you
lot
can
like we
set
did the other day.
it, set it, and then hook up. It seemed like there'd be some underground work you'd have to do, so it wouldn't take you half a day to hook it up. You could hook it up truly in an hour or two.
Right.
And get up and running. But you guys are gonna research that, sounds like.
Yep.
Well, the gallons you estimated, they're with the existing infrastructure.
With the pump station,
Right.
yeah.
So-
I haven't looked into this idea about the mobile unit.
Okay. So
The
that
portable
that
skid
could
is show
change.
1.6 mil, right? Is what you're saying, you'd like 1.6 to progress,
We
to
wanted
get
it
closer
to-
to minimum.
Right.
Right.
To hold progress up to your level.
Which is the same as the regular
That's-
pump station.
That's what we need.
They're right there. Right.
okay. Well,
We'll sort through.
yeah, we have some work to do, but, and especially the businesses out there in the hospital, you know, we're trying to rectify this as quickly as possible, so we're in a better position if something hopefully doesn't happen, but would happen again here. And I know we've put some heat on Avon to at least round up those portable pumps to get the water flowing down to us as well. Lastly, I want to thank the public, and I want to thank Troop 507, First Christian Church. Actually go to First Christian in Wadsworth, but you guys picked a great meeting to come to. I'm sure you guys were all excited. It was a long one, but on that note, I just, anything further?
Is it?
All right, I want to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.